Hello, I am Devin Moore, Humanity Rising Ambassador, founder of the Race to Speak Up anti-bullying organization, and your host of Humanity Rising's Mindful Connections podcast. We've partnered with Open Mind Health to bring you mental health professionals from across the country to educate and give you advice in real time on subjects like today's topic, which is addiction. If you have any questions during the episode, please feel free to put it in the chat and our guests will answer. We'll also have a Q&A at the end. Joining us today is Rashad Bowtie Mills. Rashad is a licensed clinical professional counselor with over 7 years of experience supporting individuals, couples, and families through a variety of emotional and mental health challenges. Rashad specializes in the areas of anxiety, depression, relationship issues, grief, and men's issues. In addition to clinical work, Rashad is an accomplished professional speaker and has reached thousands of people with messages of motivation and inspiration. Hi, Rashad. How are you doing today?
I'm exceptional. How about yourself, Devin?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I'm excited about this opportunity.
Yeah, of course. So let's start at the beginning of your journey. What inspired you to become a therapist and dedicate so much of your work to helping people with addiction?
Sure, great question. So my journey is an interesting one. It wasn't my original thought that I would grow up and be a therapist, right? So as a man of color, I didn't even know that therapists really exist. I didn't know their role. I got the idea of what a therapist may look like from maybe a movie, and that was, an older white gentleman and he was talking to somebody. And that's just the image that was in my mind, but I never thought that I would actually gravitate towards it. So I started off as a sports broadcaster. So I was able to do that for 2 years in a city called Bend, Oregon. There was a professional turn in my life. I came back to Baltimore. And when I came back to Baltimore, my thought was, well, what am I going to do now? And so I found myself being a substitute teacher. I applied for Teach for America. As a man of color with education, it's a shoe-in. I'm going to be a teacher. I really like working with kids. And I was denied. I thought that was an interesting moment in my life that I was denied. And yeah, your facial expression was the same as mine. I was denied. I'm like, man, what is going on? I want to be a teacher. And so there was a young man, and he was in the second grade, and I won't mention his name. And we were walking down the hallway, and I asked him, I said, well, why did you engage in some of the things that you engage in? And he looked at me with a very stern, straight faced look. And he said, Mr. Mills, I know what to do. My brain tells me to do the right thing, but I always go against that and do what's wrong. And I thought that it was an interesting moment. It was like an aha light bulb moment in my life. And I said, I want to be able to help kids. How can I help kids and people? Because I'm fascinated with the way the brain works. And somebody said, have you ever thought about being a therapist? And so, to make a long story short, I applied to Johns Hopkins. I got in, and then therapy has been my life ever since. And I'm approaching my 8th year of actually being licensed here in the state of Maryland.
Wow, that's very powerful. Wait, you're located in Maryland. I don't think I knew that. Because
Yes,
oh, okay.
I'm actually in Maryland. Now, Open Mind Health is based in California. So a lot of times if you were to Google them right now, you would see California, but I am licensed here in the state of Maryland.
Wow. Well, you have a very powerful story. And now addiction is something that's often talked about, but not always understood. How would you explain what addiction is to young people?
Addiction is the inability to control something that is powerful over you, and at that moment, you are powerless. Addiction is something that puts you in a state of that you may not want to engage in it, but you find yourself engaging in it because of the perceived power that it has. That's how I would describe addiction to a young person. I want to make it very clear that when we think of addiction, we are typically thinking of what we hear from the sort of the normal umbrella. The normal umbrella as we think of alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, any kind of pills, any kind of other drugs that I haven't mentioned. Those are the things that we typically associate with addiction. But young people can be addicted to sex. Young people can be addicted to video games. Young people certainly can be addicted to social media, just to name a few. Gambling. So there are other forms of addiction that I want young people that are actually listening to this, young people and young adults, and even older adults, to understand that addiction is far bigger and greater than just drugs.
Wow. It's interesting to really keep in mind, especially what you were just talking about, how just that thought of addiction has a power over the person. And I know you work closely with teens, so you've probably seen a lot of the early signs before things get serious. When working with teens, what are those signs that you would look for that might show someone is beginning to struggle with addiction?
Sure. One of those could be lack of motivation, right? So if I'm an individual that I was really engaged in school or extracurricular activities, I was motivated to do things outside of school and extracurricular activities, I no longer have the desire to do those, right? Isolation could be one. Physical appearance could be a sign, right? Sometimes when people are engaged in some addictions, the addiction actually, and these are more of the drugs and the alcohol and the pills, you start to see a shift in the person from a physical perspective. Hygiene is not the same. Self-care is not the same. So all of those things can be major signs that an individual can be struggling with some form of addiction. Now, it's also important to think about sometimes that an addiction doesn't show up in a manner where it's obvious, where I can look at my child, or I'm a teacher and I can look at a student, or I'm a friend and I can look at my friend and I notice that it's an obvious difference in what this person, how they are presenting, if you want to talk about the clinical term. I might not be able to see that all the time. So sometimes addiction is actually masked. The individual may look great on the outside. They may be keeping up this appearance, but behind closed doors in a form of secrecy, this individual still may be addicted to something. So sometimes there are signs that are more visible as opposed to others.
Yeah, it's very interesting to keep that thought in mind of like what you just said about how addiction may not be obvious, person may not be able to see it, it can be masked. I see that addiction has a lot of components, especially as a psychology major that's actually currently taking an addiction behavior based class. So I can definitely see it has a lot of components. And I know another component that is a part of addiction is just the simple fact that sometimes young people might feel like addiction is something that only happens to adults.
Mhm.
How do you help youth who feel like they're too young to get help or that addiction doesn't happen to people their age?
Well, the first thing is let's normalize it. And this is why, again, I want to applaud you for having a forum like this and talking about a subject with addiction. You're a 21-year-old college student. So you are, more so than me, you are around young people, young adults, young professionals, right? So I think it's important that we normalize it and we talk about it so people are aware. So, yes, I was always under the impression as a kid that addiction is only what? Addiction is only for older people. And I was always under the impression that addiction only looks like a certain thing, that an individual that is experiencing any battle with addiction, they're going to present in a certain way. So, to any young person actually listen to this podcast today, I would encourage you to think about that a young person can be addicted to anything. And let's validate it. It doesn't make you less than, it doesn't make you an individual that you can accept yourself because you're experiencing some kind of addiction. The more that we normalize it and then we talk about it, we can grow from it. Because there's an old saying that you can't heal what you don't reveal. So if you don't talk about it, this is what I'm actually experiencing. Yes, I'm young. I'm 13, 14, 15, 17, 21, whatever that respective age may be. And I'm going through some kind of addiction. It makes it much harder to help because there's a level of resistance that occurs. And so as I'm saying this, I think about two words that are really, really important. Self-acceptance. That I can still be a young person and I can still accept myself while I'm actively trying to work through this addiction.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up or also brought up my being around other college students. My peers are like younger audiences, and just bringing up how self acceptance can honestly just be very difficult, especially at this age. I think peer pressure is really a huge part, unfortunately, but a huge part of growing up, especially in middle school, high school, as well as college. What role does peer pressure play in leading teens towards unhealthy habits? And how can they resist it?
It plays a major role in it. Since the beginning of time, if we are in a circle, and this circle consists of 10 people, and the majority of them are smoking weed, odds are, if I don't want to smoke and I haven't developed the cognitive ability to resist, I can fall into that because I want to be a part of the crowd that's accepted. So let's think of teens and young people. When we're in those stages, we're trying to what? We're trying to be socially accepted. And if I'm trying to be socially accepted, I don't want to put my position where myself in a position where I'm ostracizing myself from what the in crowd is doing. Typically, I want to be accepted, and if I want to be accepted, then I'm going to do what that crowd, and I'm using sort of air quotes here, that quote unquote crowd is actually engaging in. And it is very, very difficult to separate yourself from the idea of peer pressure. Hey, Rashad, everybody else, we're smoking, we're drinking. You don't want to be left out. And if I'm not careful, I'm going to follow that crowd. Now, how do I put myself in a position where peer pressure is not something that I'm actually going to engage in? Number one, I have to be cognitively strong enough and I have to know my own values. I have to know my values and my belief system. And I have to be willing to stand out from others. And I have to be willing and be okay with being different. Many young people aren't that way. I struggled when I was growing up. I wanted to be a part of the in crowd. If the crowd went left, Rashad went left, even though, man, my belief system said, Rashad, you're better serving yourself if you go right. So I think that when you watch young people that put themselves in position that they don't follow the in crowd, they have a strong belief system and cognitively they're okay. They can tell themselves, I'm okay with standing outside of that crowd. But peer pressure is a very, very important thing to be aware of as it relates to young people and addiction.
Yeah, I think that being, other or being, different than other people, I think we should look at that as a positive. That's something
Yes.
that we say in Humanity Rising, our differences make us unique and beautiful. That's something that I say with Race to Speak Up, my anti-bullying organization. I like to say that we are all a part of one race, which is the human race. So when we're looking at, our differences, we should look at that as a positive. And even when it comes to social acceptance, you reminded me of a TikTok that I saw a few days ago where it was this adult man talking about he was talking about high school and his high school experience. And he was just essentially saying how he was wanting to fit in so well and feel so comfortable and just feel a lot more happy within himself that it led to in his high school community that it led to him developing an addiction to vaping, which was just all types of concerning is what also he was saying. That social acceptance can really lead you to do a lot to feel comfortable, to feel accepted, to feel happy. In fact, you often talk about something called the happy hour, but in a little bit of a different way. I remember when we spoke on the phone before this podcast, and you were saying that it related to helping people find their own version of happy. Can you talk a bit more about happy hour and how does that connect to preventing addiction?
Sure. So happy hour is really important to me. And here's why those two words are really important to me. And they are not just words, it's an experience that I actually lived. And so when I knew I had the opportunity to partner up with Open Mind Health and then be on this podcast to talk about addiction, I sort of jumped at the opportunity because, in the spirit of honesty and candor, Devin, I went through my own addiction. To this year, July the 15th, 2000, I'm sorry, July the 15th, 2000, um, July the 18th, 2015 was the last time I actually had a drink. So I have 10 years of sobriety. And when I stopped drinking, one of the things that I made it my business to understand was because I had been really, really damaged by the idea of drinking and thinking that I can only get through my problems and cope in an effective manner if I was under the influence. If I was anxious, then I went to a drink. If I was depressed, my thought was, well, I needed a drink. And so I was at somebody's happy hour every Friday at 5 p.m. actually drinking. And when I changed my life around, the thought was, you know what? I'm going to put a positive spin on happy hour. And every Friday morning at 5 a.m., I started to release motivational messages. And so my thought was, I want to change the happy hour from the negative to the positive. And happy hour really is finding your own version of happy. I thought that me drinking and engaging in those destructive behaviors, in actuality, which really pulled me down, I thought that I was being happy. In actuality, I was a sad adult human being trying to navigate life, but I didn't have the proper coping skills to do it. And so happy hour for me now is encouraging an individual to find out what makes you happy. How can I, and again, happy is a very relative term in nature, but how can I find my happy? And that looks different for all of us, but how can I find my happy amongst many of the challenges that I actually have? So my happy hour now is, okay, can I help Devin cope with some of the challenges that maybe that he has? If I'm experiencing my own bouts of anxiety, how can I find happy within that? And the reason why I like happy hour, it forces me to think about time in the moment. Many of the stresses that many people have that lead them to go and engage in addictive behaviors, they look at it they look through a lens of one that's not very myopic in the near future. I challenge people to look at your situation from a myopic lens. What is that stressor telling you or making you think about in the moment? Because once we start thinking that I'll never get past this thing and we start forecasting I'll be like this for 6 months or a year, we forget about the hour. Many of the stresses that we encounter, if we actually stop and say, well, what is this going to be like in the next hour? We'll find some strategies to help us. In the next hour, will I still feel this way? That's my idea of happy hour, changing the negative to the positive and asking myself, what makes me happy? How can I navigate this stress or this challenge in the moment? And not even just a stressor or a challenge. How can I, to the best of my ability, engage in things that make me happy and be very intentional about engaging in healthier things, not just from a reactive perspective, but proactively.
Thank you for sharing that. That is such a positive and powerful message. In fact, you're reminding me a lot of the essential causes of both Humanity Rising and Race to Speak Up. Well, of course, we also mainly focus on bullying prevention, but we also focus on, especially Humanity Rising, giving youth the chance to turn a negative into a positive, to take the negative things that they may have gone through in their past and supporting others through it, finding your own happy hour through supporting others, through making a difference and encouraging others to make a change. And unfortunately, a lot of students deal with stress, they deal with bullying or even family issues, and they may not know where to turn. So, what are some healthy coping strategies that youth can turn to when dealing with stress or bullying or family issues instead of harmful substances?
Sure. And let's think of some very basic ones. And I like to start with the most basic ones that an individual listening to this podcast can literally make sure that they engage in them by the time that this podcast is over, right? Very practical coping skills. Number one, I'm a huge advocate of movement, exercise, walking, yoga, jogging. If an individual is playing a sport, if it's a dance class. And the reason why I'm such an advocate for that is I think that that is a healthy way to cope. Movement. As humans, we're designed to move. I think many of our lifestyles have become one that, if you're a student or you're at work, that we sit for 6 to 8 hours a day. And I think that movement creates and helps with sort of some feel good chemicals, right? Movement can get you into the point that the stressor may not be gone, but I'm actively moving while the stressor is there. Sometimes it serves as a healthy distraction away from whatever that stressor is. So, movement. I love the idea of journaling, some form of writing, expressing yourself, right? Oftentimes, there have been moments in my life that I was really stressed and I kept a journal and I was able to reflect on that journal, maybe 6 months, 3 months, maybe a year later, and I can track, am I still in this state or did I make progress? And I think that the idea of journaling or some way of capturing where you are at that moment and where you're trying to go and your progress is really good because it allows you to know that, you know what, I'm making some progress. I think that that's important. If there's a spiritual component to an individual, prayer, meditation, I love those ideas. So those are some basic ones: movement, journaling, prayer, meditation. One, obviously, I'm a therapist, right? So is there a connection to therapy, right? Is there a person that you trust that you can share some things? Sometimes that's very healthy. Now, we want to make sure that we're sharing it with an individual that we trust, and we want to make sure that we understand this individual is not licensed, but sometimes just having that person that I can share, it's very cathartic in nature. I'm releasing some stuff. So those are some basic ones that I challenge people that you really can engage in outside of therapy. They don't cost anything. I mean, they don't cost anything to engage in. And most of those you can engage in them at any given time.
That makes so much sense, especially journalism or journaling. I really want to emphasize that one because not on this, I feel like there's just so many different great um it's just very helpful to journal because not only are you able to kind of get your feelings out, but you're also able to look back and realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe I am using substances as a coping mechanism. Maybe such and such is a real issue. Maybe this, and this is a real issue. Or even on another side of journalism, I mean, this is something that I did, and this is something that I stress to a lot of young people is that I took the pain that I went through, the bullying that I went through, and I wrote it down. And then that actually turned to me, and now I'm about to self promote, writing Devin Speaks Up, a children's anti-bullying book. Okay, sorry, that was quick self-promotion as the host. But I am so serious with it. You know, you're able to do things at young ages. You're able to start initiatives at young ages. It doesn't have to be, you know, such a big thing. It could be something smaller. Humanity Rising gives a great platform to all different types of people. And so when it comes to Humanity Rising and really just the work of Race to Speak Up and kind of just going along the lines of speaking about bullying prevention, let me quickly define bullying for anyone that's listening. It's defined as a power imbalance. It's repetitive. It's meant to inflict pain onto others, and it's done for a reason. I remember earlier, Rashad, you were talking about how addiction can lead to isolation, lack of motivation, lack of caring for yourself, self-care. That is unfortunately a lot of the similar causes of bullying as well. Bullying can lead to some students to try substances as an escape. What would you say to a teen in that situation?
That if a teen is being bullied and they engage in substance as a way to escape,
Yes, yes.
and it may sound repetitive, but I'm going to go back to some of those other coping skills that we mentioned, right? I think the same coping skills would apply. And I think in the idea of bullying, the other thing outside of using those coping skills that can serve as something that's really, really healthy for an individual to help them is to notify someone. I think that when we talk about bullying, many of those individuals feel extremely isolated. Hey, I can't tell anybody that, I'm being bullied and this has been happening for 2 or 3 weeks in school and I can't tell anybody. They feel like they're by themselves at that moment. So I think finding again that healthy support, whether it's a teacher, a trusted adult, or someone else, it could be even a classmate that can kind of help you navigate it so you're not feeling isolated. And I'll just share this. Oftentimes, when I am working with an individual that has been bullied, I see a lot of individuals feeling like that they have no other options, and cognitively, the thoughts go to some really dark and challenging places of self harm and things of that nature because they feel like it's just them and they don't have any supports. And so, again, I encourage anybody that's listening that is being bullied. As you said, Devin speaks up. I love the title of that, Speaking Up. I have to speak up because if I don't, somebody might not know what I'm actually experiencing, and help is available. And I know that it is very challenging to speak up because, again, there's the fear of that. What if the bully finds out? Or how is my life going to be different after I speak up? But I think speaking up is probably one of the first and most important steps. So, again, trusted individuals can give you the help and the support that you actually need.
Yes, definitely, definitely. You know, you brought up a point of how oftentimes, especially for those who are going through bullying or for those who are going through a lot of negative within their life, is that they naturally or cognitively will go towards a negative space instead of a positive. I feel like, or at least in my research and also just being someone that happens to have social media, is I noticed that most of the time people like to go and talk more about the negative and like inflicts more of a negative message on social media. I simply found just because most of the time people think that that's more interesting than being positive and, you know, being supportive of each other. Unfortunately, I don't even know what the case is with that, but I think that that is something that I've definitely seen, which is why I think we need to kind of have a shift when it comes to our mindsets, you know. And it's not easy. I'm definitely not saying that it's easy because, and at least in this life, it's not easy for a lot of people. But having that support that you were talking about, especially from friends or other people, it can bring you a long way. And I'd love for you to just expand a little bit more on what friends or maybe even classmates can do to support someone that they think might be struggling with addiction without feeling like it's all on them.
Mhm. Well, number one, listening in a non-judgmental way. That's sort of a a quote that's been going around social media probably, I don't know, the last 3 or 4 months. It says, "We listen and we don't judge." And I love that, the idea of listening and not judging. Because if an individual is being vulnerable enough and open up and sharing their struggles, they are probably really in their own way desiring someone to listen and not judge them. There's a lot of shame associated with any form of addiction. So if someone is brave enough and vulnerable enough to say, man, this is what I'm actually going through, I think that you can support someone in a great way by listening in a non-judgmental way and not assuming. So sometimes we assume why individuals addicted to this or addicted to this, how they arrived at that place. We don't want to assume, because if we assume and it's incorrect, then that can shut that line of communication down. And again, many people that open up, they're actually at a space that they really want somebody to listen. So number one, listening in a non-judgmental way. Two, not assuming. And then three, allowing the person to take the lead. You don't take the lead. Well, man, you're addicted to this. We should do this. Maybe that person can take the lead and say, you know what? I need some help. Can you help me? So I think a part of that listening, once you listen, you can kind of get a feel if that person is, they just want to open up and share, or that person wants more of a direction. They may want to listen for you to listen, but they also may want you to help give them some direction. And I think the last thing too is, I think it's okay to ask. I think it's okay to ask, is there anything that you would want me to help you with? Again, that goes into this idea of not assuming, right? I think it's okay to ask, is there anything that I can do for you? Do you want me to help you find a counselor? Do you want me to share this with to be right by your side when you share this with the mom, right? Something along those lines. So yeah, I think those things are very important, but the main one has to be listening in a non-judgmental way. And I've seen a lot of instances where there's a person that is going through addiction and they've been able to find somebody that they trust, and this person listens, and it can really change the course of their life. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, I've witnessed too that people have opened up about addiction. That person was coming from a judgmental space and assuming. It shut down that line of the communication, and it probably further complicated that person working through that addiction. So it's very important that when we encounter someone, that we start with that non-judgmental listening ear.
That is such an important message about supporting one another, about listening to each other. And so to end us off, I would love for you to give us just one last bit of advice or anything else that you would like to share, really specifically to youth who want to speak up about their struggles with addiction, but are afraid of being judged.
Mhm. Well, let me say this, and I'll go back to these two words: self acceptance. I want you to accept yourself enough, to love yourself enough, to understand that you are not defined by the situation that you're currently dealing with. I want you to know that there are people that love you enough to help you. I want you to know that there are professionals that can help you. And I want you to know that once you receive the help, it can change the course of your life in a positive way. And nothing and nothing and nothing is powerful enough to have this stronghold over your life, to have you in a position of addiction. Overcoming addiction is possible.
Thank you, Rashad. Thank you so much. You gave such valuable information about the topic of addiction. So I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you greatly, and I appreciate the work that you're doing as well.
Yeah, of course. Everyone watching, make sure to give Rashad a round of applause from behind your screens. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for joining. Remember, joining the Humanity Rising movement means that you can receive service hours for watching the Mindful Connections podcast and completing our after podcast survey. So let's be mindful and rise up for ourselves and for each other. All right, everyone, we will see you on our next episode, and have a good one. Thank you.